this video, I'll be building the best value RTX 4070 Super gaming PC build, pairing NVIDIA's latest GPU with the best price to performance components possible to assemble a system that clocks in right now at just $1,404. It just goes to show you haven't got to spend a fortune, and I'll be walking you through all the part choices that make this build possible. So let's dive into it after a quick word from today's video sponsor. The Corsair HS80 Max is a wireless gaming headset that packs a punch. With precisely tuned 50mm neodymium drivers, Dolby Atmos support, and wireless connectivity over Bluetooth and 2.4 GHz, it has you covered. Use it with a PC, Mac, PS4 or PS5 and enjoy up to 65 hours of battery life wirelessly and 130 hours on Bluetooth in the process. Need a top up? 15 minutes of charge bags you up to 6 hours of use. Check it out at the first links in the description below. Let's kick things off by taking a look at NVIDIA's latest GPU, the card you've all heard so much about and probably the industry's worst kept secret. Now, this particular model is the Asus Dual. The reason I've picked this is because their Dual edition, if you will, has consistently provided some of the best price to performance metrics on the market. Now, we have opened this before, it doesn't come quite packaged like this, and what you'll see is a design that looks really quite familiar. The 4070 brings improvements to the number of CUDA cores, the number of RT cores, the number of Tensor cores, and replaces the cut down AD103 in the original 4070 with a full fat AD103 for between 15 and 20% more performance. We'll dive into detailed gaming benchmarks later, but in short, the 4070 Super delivers what NVIDIA intended it to. More performance at the same price as the original 4070. The only major gripe is that VRAM stayed the same when compared to the original 4070. That leaves it with 4 gigs less video memory than something like an RX 7800 XT, but you do get better raw performance, and of course you get far better ray tracing and DLSS support than you do with AMD's ray tracing and FSR equivalents. The 4070 Super isn't alone. We'll also be taking a look at the new 4070 Ti Super and 4080 Super in the coming weeks. And what we've seen from the Super release in general is some of the most aggressive pricing from NVIDIA in a long time. The RTX 4070s dropped down to $549, but we would say the extra $50 is worth it for the increased performance of the 4070 Super, while the 4070 Ti Super sees no price change but more VRAM, and the 4080 Super sees a $200 MSRP reduction. NVIDIA are clearly keen to start selling a few more GPUs. Asus of course aren't the only one to bring out a 4070 Super, not by any stretch of the imagination. We also have this palette dual card in recently, which is a little bit thinner, and you can watch a full video where we looked at this card in a bit more detail, while NVIDIA have taken a slightly different spin on things with their Founders Edition, as those of you who saw our recent short will have seen. They've gone all black stealthy. It's like a Batman edition of the graphics card, and I personally quite like it. I do have a soft spot for the silver, and I think without any RGB or other kind of silvery accents, it looks perhaps a little bit bland, but the build quality does feel really quite nice. The intention for this video isn't to be a big comparison of which 4070 Super you can buy, although we have written an article which covers just that, but while we're here, you might as well take a look at the Gigabyte card too, a slightly different approach and the only 3-fan MSRP card available. The main reason though for actually getting these out and standing them up side by side was to show one big difference with the 4070 Super that people aren't really talking about, and that is of course the inclusion of the Gen 5 power cable as standard on all the AIB models we've seen. Previously, manufacturers were still integrating 8 pins on the 60 Ti and standard 70 edition card. That has changed this time around. I'll be pairing up the RTX 4070 Super with AMD's Ryzen 5 7600X. With a base clock speed of 4.7 GHz and a boost right up to 5.3, the single-threaded performance is really solid. The multi-core performance isn't quite as solid as the competition. Intel's more expensive 14600K delivers a few more cores, but is much hotter and, as I say, more pricey. The 7600X isn't going to bottleneck in most titles, making it a really great shout for the RTX 4070 Super. Having gone for a Ryzen platform, we of course need an AM5 motherboard, and that's where the tough gaming B650M Plus comes in as my screwdriver goes flying. This is a great shout because it gives us all the features from the B650 chipset without costing a fortune and while looking pretty good in the process. Now, for those of you who are perhaps a little less aware, when it comes to motherboards, the main way to differentiate between the features that are available is via the chipset that's used. Unlike on Intel, the B series chipset, which is the budget chipset, actually supports overclocking. So a board like this with fairly decent power delivery means we can overclock our Ryzen 5 7600X just a little bit. You also get pretty good connectivity options overall, and if I'm being brutally honest, any decent B650 motherboard will be fine for this build. You haven't got to go and spend an absolute fortune, and the motherboard's an area where you can save yourself a decent chunk of money quite safely. Always make sure though you've got things like 4 RAM DIMM slots, and the reason that's useful because it enables you to get dual channel performance. Now when you've got a kit like this T-Force Delta RGB, which features two 16GB DIMMs, the RAM not only pairs up to give you double the capacity, 32 gigs, but you get double the bandwidth, as the PC is able to write to both RAM DIMMs simultaneously. It's almost a bit like having 2 storage drives and being able to write to 2 at the same time. It also, of course, opens up the paths for future upgrades. It means that you can go ahead and pick up an identical kit of this memory and actually get yourself 64 gigs of RAM without having to remove the kit you bought in the first place. Click that in nice and easily. This T-Force Delta kit is my RAM of choice because it's so affordable. You can get a CL32 kit with a lower latency for about $100. This is Crucial's P3 Plus, and it's my favorite entry-level Gen 4 NVMe drive. That's going to give us read and write speeds up to 5 gigabytes a second. And believe it or not, when you've got quite a powerful GPU, which the 4070 Super really has become, you actually need a fast M.2 drive in order to avoid a storage bottleneck. The truth of the matter is you're always going to have a part in your system that bottlenecks, because if there was nothing holding back performance, you'd basically have unlimited performance. But what we want to avoid is bottlenecking expensive components like the GPU, as that just makes no sense. Now the drive clicks in nice and easily, and it's got a toolless slot, so all we need to do is line it up, push the clip over, and it's as simple as that. You still have to screw on the heat shield, but this is going to do a great job of just keeping the drive nice and cool, and of course saves you money, meaning you don't have to buy the heatsink version of the M.2 drive. While we're building the PC onto the motherboard, it also makes sense at this stage to look at the cooler, and I'm actually really excited about the choice of cooler for this system. Not as excited as the new GPU, obviously, but the cooler is a little bit of a special one. And I've said this time and time again, not an ad or anything like that. Deepcool they're just smashing it. They're just completely killing the game, and it is absolutely amazing to see. This is their AK400 digital, and not only is it a stunning matte black design with pre-applied thermal paste, black heat pipes, and integrated RGB, but it has a screen on the top which actually shows you live metrics like your CPU or GPU temperature. It does all of this for about $40, $45. It really is quite incredible value for money. I also really like Deepcool's installation method. I actually think it's quite innovative in the grand scheme of things. Basically, it uses a plate like this to install the cooler. This plate is universal, so it installs to AMD or Intel motherboards using these orange stoppers and silver screws, in our case, and leverages the built-in backplate on the motherboard itself. And once it's on, means all you need to do is just drop the cooler directly into place. Line up the 2 sort of pre-mounted or pre-installed screws within the actual air cooler and just give these a tighten. The thermal paste being pre-applied means you haven't got to worry about that step either. And the fact that everything is sort of nicely done, or at least started off for you, means it's kind of impossible to go wrong when it comes to installing this CPU cooler. I'll be leaving the fan off for now, as obviously that's going to make things a bit easier when it comes to getting the motherboard into the case and just adding it back on towards the end really of the build today. And with the motherboard assembly complete, I can go ahead and get the case out. Now this is another pretty popular choice within the community when it comes to budget PC cases. It is of course the Fractal Pop Air. Now this is the boring, bland, black version, but there is a multicolored option where you can get it with like a blue or an orange inserts inside the chassis, with a different color motherboard tray adding a bit of pizzazz, I suppose. Now, taking a look at the case, the first port of call is actually probably stripping it down and lying it flat on your table. That's going to allow you to check that all the motherboard standoffs are in the right places, and in this build there are a few that I need to swap over. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, so that the motherboard installation is not only easier, but that it's got actually the correct posts in which to screw into. You'll often find this being the case if you've gone for a smaller or larger motherboard than is perhaps what is standard for your chassis, and making sure these line up is super important. Once they do line up though, we can go ahead and just drop the motherboard into place. Integrated rear I/O shields nowadays make this step so easy, it's unbelievable. Get it all lined up. There we are, lovely stuff. And it should all feel like it's not really going to go anywhere and it's in the right place. Screw it down with all the different screw hole locations. On this motherboard there's 8 in total to get them all done while the case is laid down flat, and then you can return the CPU cooler fan on if you wish. And with that all sorted, we can finally go ahead and put the GPU in. Now, by the looks of things, I have used this case before, so the right PCI lane covers have already been removed. If they haven't, just grab yourself a screwdriver and unscrew any of these thumb screws to release the right slots for your card. Make sure you push back the clip on the motherboard, slide the GPU into place. Here we are. A bit of pressure and that's going to click in without too much bother. A couple of screws will fasten that down, either thumb screws or PSU size screws are totally fine, and I think that is sort of coming together quite nicely. A pretty stealthy, all black build, but I like it. All that remains then, before we take a deep dive into performance, is the PSU. Now this is, it's featured time and time and again on the channel for a few key reasons. It's Thermaltake Smart BM3 750 watt, and to my knowledge, it's the cheapest 750 watt PCI Gen 5 ATX3 compatible power supply. For anyone who doesn't really care about the technical terminology, what it means is it's affordable, it's got 750 watts, and it has the all-important PCIe Gen 5 power cable that we obviously need for this build. You do get an adapter with not only this tough card, but all of the cards. Honestly, who wants to use an adapter when you can have one sleek, slimline cable that looks a little something like this? This is only rated for 300 watts. They can be up to like 600, but obviously we've only got 750 watts of power. So it's basically to stop you using this with like a 4080 or a 4090, where you are going to see a bit of a failure. It also gives us lots of other power cables, like a SATA power cable, which will need to power up the RGB hubs and fan hubs on the rear of the Fractal Pop Air. But otherwise, I think all these extra cables are basically surplus to requirements, so I'll box those up later and tidy last build first, while I go ahead and just pop into the power supply, our 12-pin Gen 5, and of course, the SATA power cable, a bit like so. This case obviously has a nice little power supply compartment at the bottom, so that's going to hide away not only the PSU, but all our other cables quite nicely, and wires up pretty easily. I won't be spending any extra money for this build on cable extensions, as I want to keep the cost down, but you can find our recent, more high-end 4070 Super build, where I went a bit more all out with the bells and whistles, including using some PSU extensions for good measure. And a few cables later, it's time to see if this thing is going to boot first time, or at least power up, fan spinning, RGB. Let's take a look. Here we go. Oh, that was immediate. I was like straight away. This never happens normally. We normally get it working, but it normally takes a couple of stabs, but I think we're pretty much good to go. Now, we haven't got any information on our CPU cooler. We'll have to configure that in software, but that can wait because we, of course, want to take a look at those benchmarks of the 4070 Super and see if it's a card you really should consider buying. Moving through into performance, and it's time to see exactly how the 4070 Super stacks up in some of your guys' favourite titles. The first game we tested was Alan Wake 2, first at 1440p high settings, with no ray tracing, no DLSS, just straight rasterization performance. Here the 4070 Super pulled in 72 FPS on average, with 90 and 99 percentile results of 67 and 63. Frame rates were pretty consistent, and when you pop this on a graph and compare it to other AIB 4070 Supers from NVIDIA, Palette, and GeekaWhat, you'll see here the Asus Dual comes out really quite nicely. Turn on ray tracing and also enable DLSS 3.0, and the frame rate skyrockets up to 97 FPS. And again, the Dual looks to outperform some of its other AIB and Founders Edition competition. If you'd like to see graphs comparing the 4070 Super against other non-4070 Supers, check out the link in the cards now to our launch review video of the 4070 Super. Move through into Call of Duty's Warzone 3, and here at 1440p high, again no DLSS enabled, the card achieved 141 FPS on average in this build. 90 and 99 percentile results, again pretty strong. Enable DLSS 3 and we see a nice increase in frame rate of about 58 frames per second through to 199 FPS on average. Again, those 90 and 99 percentile results look good too. With DLSS enabled, the Asus Dual tops the stack of the GeekaWhat Founders and Palette cards, although admittedly there is only about 3 frames per second in it, though with DLSS 3.0 disabled, it sits more towards the bottom, lagging behind the Founders and GeekaWhat cards by 1 and 3 FPS respectively. In Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 3 at 1440p high with DLSS again enabled and set to quality, the 4070 Super in this build achieved 188 FPS on average. While moving through into Starfield, a really difficult to run game, yielded some actually pretty fantastic results. 1440p high, straight vanilla, just rasterization to begin with, delivered 88 FPS on average, but turning DLSS 3 on with the power of frame generation boosted us right up to 162 FPS. Starfield, a really difficult game to run, but DLSS 3 given a really nice helping hand here. Hogwarts Legacy at 1440p high with DLSS 3 and ray tracing enabled and set to the high preset continued our run of good results. 177 FPS on average in Hogwarts Legacy really isn't bad. A quick look at the esports titles. Fortnite at 1080p competitive, because why not? And you guys always ask for it. Delivered 288 FPS on average, while Apex Legends at 1440p high delivered 234 FPS on average all told. The 4070 Super then evidently a really powerful GPU, but should you buy it, especially when compared to something like an RX 7800 XT? Why not check out our full review article linked in the cards section now. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop it a like rating, get subscribed. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.